if you want to be over there.
Sure. Okay. So first of all, what is Mo short for?
Well, Candice, my father in the late 1960s, when I was born, was a diplomat, and he was the ambassador, actually, to Mozambique. I wanted to see how many people here were too polite to just laugh right away. And usually I go on to say that my mother was a hippie and she was hitchhiking across the Mojave Desert. The real answer is more boring than that. My real name is Maurice. Some people still call me Maurice.
Really? Huh.
As I speak of the pompousness of love. So.
And what is a Roctogenarian?
A Roctogenarian is somebody who refuses to accept the conventional wisdom that the last third of life is a time for just slowing things down, wrapping things up, winding down. Somebody who is not fixated on the past, not fretting about the future, and just goes for it at that time of life.
Why, being so youthful, were you drawn to this? I'm so glad you were, but...
Well, I think, and I'm going to be presumptuous here, but I think that maybe you and I share this in common, because I have to just insert here that one of the joys of my professional life, creative life for the last few years, was you coming and talking to me about your dear father, Edgar Bergen, for my podcast from Obituaries, and about growing up with a ventriloquist dummy as a brother,
yes.
Right? And I think that your father was on the older side when you were born,
yeah.
And I was the same way. I have older parents. My mother is still with us, and I always kind of liked that. I felt like it gave me a window into another time. Most of my friends growing up, their parents were sort of on the oldest edge of the baby boomer generation. But my father, for him, like Elvis Presley was kind of newfangled and a little too edgy. Like he was Bing Crosby. So I think that's kind of why, for a long time, old people have been my jam. But I mean, can I ask you, are you sort of the same way, though? Did you, because of growing up with a father, the great Edgar Bergen, who was a little bit on the older side, did you feel like you had kind of a window into an earlier generation, or?
No.
Well, there goes that line of questioning.
No, I didn't, but certainly I had older friends, and I still would, but they died.
Right. I know. Only with you can I talk about Rudy Valley. We don't talk enough about Rudy Valley because
I'm not sure they know who you're talking about.
I don't know. I think this crowd might. He was the first crooner. So, all right.
Colonel Sanders?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to ask, did you ever meet Colonel Sanders?
No.
Because you've met everyone, but you haven't
I have met very many people.
Right.
I've been very lucky, but not Colonel Sanders. And I can't say I'm sorry.
Look, right now, KFC is sort of one of the lowest rated fast food chains, but in its day, Candice,
yes.
It was finger-licking good. So, all right, so my wonderful co-author, Jonathan Greenberg, and I had to begin with Harlan Sanders because the story never gets old. So Harlan Sanders, you know, he was born dirt poor in Kentucky, 7th grade education, worked all sorts of jobs to get by and help support his own family, his siblings. He was a midwife at one point as a young man. But he was living his life doing fine in the small town of Corbin, Kentucky, where he had a Shell gas station / chicken and biscuits joint. And then in the 1950s, a highway cuts through Kentucky, bypasses the town. The bottom falls out of his business. He has to sell it at loss at auction. He is 66 at this point. He's surviving on Social Security, which is $105 a month. And he could have subsisted. But instead, what he does is he gets in his car with 2 pressure cookers and a bucket of his secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices, and he drives town to town, restaurant to restaurant, cooking for people, and they don't have to pay for it if they don't like it. And within 8 years, he's the face of an empire with 800 outlets worldwide.
Huh.
And I think what John and I loved about this story is there's something so amazing about him getting in that car. First of all, it would be a great montage in a biopic, right? In the car going town to town. But not looking back, just moving forward, just doing, just acting. And I think there's something so inspiring about that. Speaking of food, you know, I had a cooking series where I went around the country cooking with grandmothers and grandfathers in their kitchens. It was called My Grandmother's Ravioli. And one thing I learned during that show, oh, thank you. All right. It's a generality, but it seems to me that the older you get, the less you care about what other people think of you. All right? Is that right? I mean, I think it's kind of true. I don't know. And I don't think it's a surprise that we could fill this book so easily with people who were kind of unfettered, who weren't worried about how they would come off, who just acted, who just did.
Mm-hmm. And how did you decide on how many people are in the book?
It's about, I believe, like 26 longer essays interspersed with one-page kind of bite-sized biographies. You know, I think one of the fun things about compiling a book like this is deciding on the mix. And I know I learned from the best in my job at CBS Sunday Morning, where I'm a correspondent. Our executive producer focuses so much on the mix and making sure that every next story is kind of a surprise. That's what I think we wanted, that, you know, you go from sort of a serious, weighty story like Mary Church Terrell, who at 86 led sit-ins at Washington, D.C., segregated lunch counters. That's a story with a lot of protein. I think it really fills you up. But then you turn the page, I'm not sure if it's the exact next page, and then you see Mr. Pickles, the Houston Zoo tortoise who became a first-time father at 90. And you were impressed by Al Pacino at 83. Have you ever worked with Al Pacino?
No.
Or Mr. Pickles?
I was impressed that you have animals in this book. You have turtles, you have tortoises, sorry.
Yeah.
You have horses. I mean, what's the horse?
Well, there's Snowman, the show jumping horse, who was like
He's
left
great.
for dead, ready to go to a slaughterhouse, to the glue factory at 8 years old, which is already old. And by 11 years old, thank goodness for Harry de Leyer, a great Dutch writer, saw something in him when he was getting ready to be carted off. Their eyes met.
What they saw was when they had put him in a pen, he kept jumping the fence. And they said, what is going on? So they kept raising the fence, and he kept jumping the fence. And they said, we're going to tie a tire to his tail. And he jumped the fence with the tire. And they said, okay, he's got his freedom. And they put him in a pasture, and he was a happy boy.
A happy boy. And that's absolutely right? Because Harry de Leyer got him from the slaughterhouse, but had promised a neighbor that the next horse he got, he would give to the neighbor. The neighbor had it in his paddock, had Snowman. And Snowman, though clearly when his eyes met Harry's at the auction, there was something there. So he kept, even as you point out, even after a tire was attached to him, still kept leaping over. And then that neighbor just said, look, you guys belong together. Like, we're not meant to be. I mean, like in any great love story, right? Like, you guys belong together. No, I guess we wanted to include animals because we didn't want to be humancist. I don't know what the word would be, anti-animal. But yeah, so we have a section on horses. And then, of course, we have Mr. Pickles, the tortoise.
Yes.
And Carol Channing, who found love at 82. Which has nothing to do with the Mr. Pickles story, sorry.
Did you recognize any patterns among the subjects in the book? Growing older, being accomplished older people?
Well, I think some of them would seem very obvious, that they're people that are not looking backward, are not interested in sort of playing highlight reels of their greatest accomplishments. There are other patterns. There are people who look at endings as beginnings. So Henri Matisse is already hailed as one of the great modernists by the time, well before he's 70, but in his 70s, cancer robs him of the ability to paint. He can no longer sit upright. He has to be reclined in a wheelchair or lying in a bed. But instinctually, he trades in his paintbrush for a giant pair of scissors. And he begins cutting colored sheets of paper and pinning them to the wall. We're lucky to live in New York and go to MoMA and see the swimming pool, remounted there. And you can see lots of tiny pinholes because he was still meticulous about how they were placed, and and with the aid of assistants, had them repositioned. But that was turning, and the title of that chapter is Loss into Gain. It also includes Borges, who really was a great short story writer before he went blind in his 50s and 60s and then turned to poetry, to verse, because he was able then to compose in his head now that he was robbed of the ability to see. But so there's that kind of resourcefulness. There's also a kind of, in many of these stories, a sort of return to childhood. I think Matisse is that way. He described the paper cutout phase of his career as a second life, but he also talked about the lack of complication, that he was dealing now with bright colors and big shapes, and that there was something childlike, not childish about it, and that was freeing. And so you see that in we found that in a lot of these stories, sometimes in literal ways or literary ways. Laura Ingalls Wilder and Frank McCourt returning to the stories of their childhoods and really having to be convinced that their stories were worth telling, which I find very poignant. And Frank McCourt was 66 when he was finally published in Angela's Ashes.
Huge.
Did you ever meet him?
No.
Oh, you never met him? Okay, all right, I'm sorry. I'm asking all the wrong names. And Laura Ingalls Wilder was 65 when she had the first of those 8 books, and I loved those books as a kid. And then there are ways, again, returning to childhood or early life. We have a section called Unfinished Business. Brian May, the Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame guitarist for Queen.
Talk about him.
Right. He was an aspiring astrophysicist. He was studying, and then he happened to have this other talent. And so he went for a different kind of rock, but it nagged at him.
But for people who don't quite know who Brian May might be.
We are the champions, right? So he was, the lead guitarist for Queen, and he had been mesmerized by the name is slipping me, but a great long-running show about space on British television growing up, and then at the age of 60, he returned to his graduate studies and earned his PhD. And so, I mean, it's kind of a real life back to school.
He earned his PhD in
astrophysics, right? Finishing that up, yeah. So smart cookie.
Yeah.
And has even participated in projects in cooperation with NASA. But I'm really I find I just want to go back to Frank McCourt a little bit because it's John and I were so kind of moved by this story because he had been teaching high school English in New York City at Stuyvesant, and he told stories about his upbringing in Limerick, Ireland, as a way of sort of keeping his kids focused, keeping them in the tent. But they and writer friends of McCourt said, you've got to tell this story, you've got to put it down. And he really, really struggled with this.
He waited till his mother died.
Yes, and that was a big part of it. And he was ashamed of the poverty he grew up in. And finally, he decided, in his words, that he would die howling if he didn't tell this story. And he did. And he ultimately said, it took me 2 years and all of my life to tell this story. But I just find it to the other side of that, the possibility that if he hadn't told it, how heartbreaking that would be, not just for all of us, but for him. Anyone who doesn't think their story is worth telling, at least to somebody, that's heartbreaking.
Yes. On a lighter note, you have a chapter on Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks, and Norman Lear.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, yeah, right. I mean, they lived a really long time, and Mel Brooks is still with us at 98. Carl Reiner almost made it to 100, and Norman, of course, made it to 101. And
is that because they laughed so much?
Well, you know, it's funny when people say laughter keeps you young. I mean, there's so many of these aphorisms that just sound like, yeah, that's a nice idea. But these guys have credibility, and when they tell you that laughter kept them young, you better listen. Mm-hmm. I think it was laughter. I think also their engagement with the world. I think that's a big part of it, and this came up in my conversations with Rita Moreno for this book as well, about just remaining engaged. And for them, for these three guys, it was about being funny. And we just felt it was important to acknowledge also that we call them the founding fathers of comedy, that they collectively are responsible for so much of what we think is funny, what several generations think is funny, and it cannot be overstated. I mean, what they did in film and obviously in sketch television and in sitcoms. I mean, Carl Reiner basically kind of creating the narrative sitcom, and then Norman Lear making sure it said...
He taught us what was funny. He taught us about comedy on television. Television can be useful.
Well, as you well know, and did you ever work with Mel Brooks?
Nope.
But you know him. You know him, though.
I didn't work with anybody.
You worked with some people. You worked with Oscar Levant. That's a whole other story, but yeah, which I will have to ask you about. We felt it was really, really important to acknowledge their monumental achievements. And I became lucky enough to know Norman Lear because my friend and colleague at CBS, Dr. John LaPook, is his son-in-law. And so in 2015, I was able to do a profile of him for Sunday Morning. And what struck me is at the time Norman was 93. And I thought, okay, Norman Lear's a legend. I love all those shows. I'm going to go down and meet a guy who's sort of a figurehead, kind of an eminence grise. And he was working on a pilot of a sitcom that never got produced called Who Died, about an assisted living facility with a great cast, actually. It had the amazing June Squibb and Margot Martindale and other people in the reading. And I expected that he'd have a cadre of assistants sort of doing everything. And I'd never met him. And I sat next to him in this theater. It happened to be in Austin, Texas, which is where he was getting an award. And they were staging the reading down there. And what struck me immediately was that he was mouthing the lines with the actors, and he was getting agitated if he felt like they weren't landing the jokes. And then several times he would just get out of his chair and get up onto the stage. And I thought, this is real. He is in it. He is completely in it. And then, I love this, is in 2019, that last New Year's Eve before the pandemic, my partner and I were guests at his at a New Year's Eve party that he was at, that John LaPook threw. And after we rang in the new year, I guess at this point Norman was probably, I was trying to do the math here, probably 97. And I said, oh, I had to go call my mother and just to wish her Happy New Year. And he said, how old's your mother? And I said, she's 94. And he said, she's just a kid, which I thought was very funny.
How did you decide why were there people recognized in late life? Why include those people?
Well, you know, I think we were sort of looking for kind of the anti-Van Gogh, right? There's the horrible thing of the person unrecognized in their time. right, who achieves greatness and is not around to be recognized. But there are these stories of people who did achieve great things early, middle, later in life, and then, thank goodness, live long enough to be recognized. And there were 3 people in this category, one of whom was Tyrus Wong, who had been profiled on CBS Sunday Morning, and I just was really gripped by this story that my colleague Tracy Smith did. And he was an immigrant from China, so poor in his Chinese village as a child that they had to hang poultry up on ropes so that rats on the dirt floor couldn't get to it. And at the age of 8, he would never see his mother or other siblings again. He came with his father through Angel Island off the coast of California, detained for a month. Can you imagine at that age being separated from your one parent at that point? The father, though, saw his artistic talent and worked so hard at a time when Chinese Americans were truly legally second-class citizens, and put him through the Otis Art Institute in Pasadena, California, because he showed such promise. Eventually, Tyrus Wong made it to the Walt Disney Studios, and his name in Chinese means the same thing as Buena Vista, which means beautiful view, so it was all meant to be. And there, he became responsible for the look of Bambi. He was he studied the Impressionists, but also the brushwork of the Song Dynasty, which was more impressionistic, which could convey moisture, which was very unlike the look of Snow White, which had been the first blockbuster right before Bambi. And when he was developing these backgrounds, Walt Disney himself, whom he never met, saw this and said, oh my God, that's the look. So Tyrus Wong became the person responsible for this incredible, evocative, overused word, but not here, iconic look of Bambi. And he was not recognized. Eventually there was a strike and he was let go even though he did not strike. And he would, in his life, end up doing beautiful work with kites and had an incredibly fulfilling artistic life, wasn't bitter about any lack of recognition. But then luckily late in life, when he was already in his late 80s, he was named a Disney legend. And then a whole cascade of awards came. And we just really wanted to tell that wonderful story of somebody in a section of the book called It's About Time who does receive the recognition. And you think, thank goodness. And he and Carmen Herrera, the abstract expressionist, who had her first solo exhibition at a major museum when she was 101.
Wow.
She too had spent her life unrecognized.
Oh, gosh.
And John Goodenough, the co-inventor of the lithium-ion battery, who received a Nobel in '97, all of them had one thing in common. They all had spouses of close to or exceeding 60 years whom they credited with being the person who got them through, who said, who through their decades of being essentially unrecognized, told them, you have talent, you're special, and got them through.
Well,
I thought I'd get applause for that. And can I just tell you about the tortoise again? Because Mr. Pickles, one of the great things is Mr. Pickles, okay, 90, first-time father, I don't know if it's Mrs. Pickles, I don't know the relationship, she's in her 50s, but the 3 kids are named Dill, Gherkin, and Jalapeno.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Let's talk about the presidential candidates just for a minute.
Why?
Just in terms of their age,
Yeah.
how ready will they be? Because they're close in age, closer than some pretend. How will it be for them to take on the space of responsibilities that come with that office?
Well, it just so happens I have the results of their mental competency tests right here. I really think they should, I mean, at this point, all bets are off, obviously, because there was some news over the weekend. No, I mean, like, I think that as a voter, I wish they would scrap the second debate and take a mental competency test. I think it would be an amazing live television event for them both to undergo that. That would be major ratings. But yes, I think that. But I'll tell you, there were a few reasons we didn't include them in the book. Also because politics enough. We hope this is frankly a nice break. There is a small section on people who screwed it up in the end, and it includes Rudy Giuliani, because sometimes really you just have to do nothing. The best thing is to do nothing to preserve your legacy. I can't say. I mean, I'm not a doctor, and I don't even play one on TV. That's for the older people here. But I understand, and again, as a voter, I would like to see mental competency tests. I think that is important. Full physical exams, absolutely full transparency. There is a however here, which is I do think that the concern, even the freak out over, and it's more in the case of Biden's age, is I'm concerned that will be used to kind of to bolster the ageism that is real in our society, that is insidious, and that is just really stupid. It's just really stupid with all this great human capital to just kind of fixate on a number and just say too old. I mean, there are studies that show that absolutely, we know this, that the recall of proper names starts slipping, absolutely, but that judgment also goes up. And I do think that there is something very compelling about, this is not for everyone, but for public servants late in life. And the story of Mary Church Terrell, I think, is an important one, because this is a woman who, in her early life, she'd been a leader in the fight against lynching as a young woman. She accompanied Frederick Douglass to the White House to petition President Benjamin Harrison, to come out more strongly against it. As a woman in her middle age, she co-founded the NAACP. She had more than earned her rest. And when she was 86, she began leading these sit-ins, partly because she was so insulted, to say the least, when she was rejected from the American Association of University Women simply because of her race, even though she was one of the first black women to attain a higher degree, hers at Oberlin. But what I found so powerful about this story is, when you think of the civil rights movement, you think of the younger leaders like, John Lewis, 25, leading the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Martin Luther King, 34, with I Have a Dream speech. But, you don't think about the older leaders. And she was fighting for a world that, at best, she would live in for a couple of years, at best. And indeed, she died about a year after the Supreme Court ruled in her favor, and public accommodations were desegregated in D.C. But she was doing it for her literal and figurative children and children's children. And so I do think that public servants who are devoting themselves late in life, there's something very powerful about that.
Diana Nyad, was she 64 when she made the last swim from Cuba to Florida?
Yeah. Have you met her?
No.
Really? But no. You're the first woman host of Saturday Night Live. Okay, she's the first woman host. And Diana Nyad, I think, came on Saturday Night Live. She did something on Saturday Night Live in the 70s. Because when she swam, in her 20s, she swam around the island of Manhattan and became sort of a celebrity in the 70s. But she had tried at 28 to swim from Cuba to the Florida Keys, and she did not succeed. And so she put it away for 30 years, that dream. And then she returned to it at 58. And here's what's remarkable, is that she still, as anyone who saw that movie, and I really liked that movie. I thought Annette Bening was amazing as Diana Nyad. I mean, it was one of those crazy performances where you're like, you just got to get an award just for what you put yourself through. It was incredible. But anyway, she was 58 when she tried again, and she still kept failing. Box jellyfish were stinging her, crazy things were happening. And then she succeeded at 64. And, it's kind of an old showbizy word, but I love the word stick-to-itiveness, and I'd really like to see it show up in the dictionary.
Yes, I agree. Frank Lloyd Wright and I.M. Pei.
Did you ever meet I.M. Pei?
I did.
You did?
Yes! Thank God.
Yes. So,
We didn't date or anything.
You know, it's so funny that you said that because I was like, did he court you at one point? I could just be see. He was so charming. The pictures,
Very.
the video, he's super charming. Like
Yeah.
I.M. Pei really had it going on. Well, so there is this whole thing about architects who just keep getting better. It's wild how many architects reach their peak in their 80s, even 90s.
Frank Gehry.
What's that?
Frank Gehry.
Yeah, Frank Gehry's in his 90s. Rem Koolhaas. I mean, there's so many. Who's the one we did a piece on? Stephen, what's his name? Who did the Houston Museum of Art? It's Stephen Hole. Stephen Hole. Yeah. And he's like a Mr. Pickles. He had kids like him at 90, like too. I mean, but an architect. And, anyway, but okay. So the point is that Frank Lloyd Wright was obviously already very famous. He had been on the cover of Time magazine with Falling Water, but he received the commission.
Tell them what Falling Water is.
What's that?
Tell them what Falling Water is.
Oh, Falling Water is a house that if you visit it, you're going to want to pee constantly because you're just anywhere you go in this amazing house in Western Pennsylvania, you hear water, and I know that's part of the selling point.
Because it's built over a waterfall.
Well, that is true. That is a very good point. But I don't know about you, but when I went through it a couple summers ago, I just had to keep going to the bathroom because you're just hearing the water. I mean, I could never. And also, he wouldn't allow shades on the windows. I'm not interested in natural light in the morning. Like I need to be like a bat.
You don't have to buy the house.
All right. Maybe if I were invited, I would go and I'd bring my Delta Airlines like mask. Okay. But in his 70s, when people were counting him out, thought he was yesterday's news, he received a commission for the Guggenheim. He submitted the first design when he was 84, and the abstract expressionists of the day were outraged. They said the design didn't really suit their art, that it was more about the architecture itself being the main event. They were, I think, proven wrong. I think it's as...
But you could understand. I mean, it was a very original, flashy design, and all anybody cared about in the beginning was walking into this space that was a first.
Right, I think that's right. Well, but you know the thing.
And do you get enough distance from the paintings to be able to appreciate them appropriately?
Yeah, I would just love to slide down the banister. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing?
Me too, but
to do just get. I mean, I wish I could skateboard because that would be amazing.
I'm sure you can arrange it, Mo.
I think so. I know people. But you know, it's interesting though because he repurposed a design for what was essentially a Maryland mountain car park. That was going to be for cars to go up. I think in the, I forget the name of the mountains. It starts with a C. Yeah. I'm from fake Maryland. I'm from Bethesda, which is really DC. So I'm revealing how little I really know about my state. And I.M. Pei, but I.M. Pei is such a great story because, you know, when President Mitterrand, did you ever meet him? You did. I know you did.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Well, you know, I wish he were still alive because then I could tell you to thank him for really having I.M. Pei's back. Because
well, it's hard since he's not.
Right. Yeah, but you probably know a psychic. Okay. Yeah, but he you know, when they commissioned, when the design was unveiled for the glass pyramid in the center of the Louvre, the French were outraged.
They're French.
That's what they do.
That's what they do.
It's a birthright to be outraged.
They were thrilled to have the opportunity to be outraged.
Well, that's right, exactly. Yes, they invented outrage culture, but over things that are more beautiful than what we get outraged about. But Mitterrand had his back. And so when eventually that glass pyramid was finished, was constructed, and really what IMP did involved taking this 800-year-old palace, which was, people don't remember, but was visited by tourists on average for less than an hour. It was hot, it was confusing.
There were no bathrooms, there was no conveniences.
Right, and to think like if it, and if
I know that because of your book.
Oh, okay, well, right, yeah. No, I know, and you're right, and no bathrooms, and thank God it wasn't in Western Pennsylvania, because everybody would be screwed. But there's something so rock and roll about putting a glass pyramid in the middle of an 800-year-old French palace. And for this 75-year-old man to do that, to go, this is what it's going to be, because he could have done something that conformed much.
And for the French to do it, to okay it and finance it.
I mean, yeah, it's just such a badass move. And I think really captures what people in this book, and a lot of older people do, the qualities that we ascribe to younger people that really don't apply. I don't know that a young architect certainly would have had the authority, or even the chutzpah to do what IMP did with the Louvre. And it was so appropriate that he followed that up by then, of course, designing the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum in Cleveland.
Yeah,
so, no,
which is fantastic.
Right.
But the Louvre, the Louvre was a fort originally, and so there was no light below grade, there were no conveniences, nothing. It was like he bombed the courtyard of the Louvre and let in light and flooded it, and it was spectacular coming to life.
He liberated it in a sense.
Yeah.
He liberated it.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
We're coming to another So, all right, any advice for those who want to embark on their next best life?
Well, I take Geritol. And I'm on the go 24 and a half hours a day. I would say, you have to get to that place where you go, what's the worst that can happen? And just do it. Because if you don't do it, you're going to die howling. Because look, the worst thing that can happen is you fail. And are people really going to care? They're too involved with their phones to care.
Yeah.
I mean, they might be reading about your failure on their phone, but then they'll move on to the next one. And so, but I really think that's the best, is just you can will yourself not to care about the worst possibility. Unless it's skydiving. Okay, that would be bad.
Do you think New York City or the USA could have Roctogenarians as they age?
The question is New York City Roctogenarian friendly?
I don't know.
Well, I think a couple of things. I actually think New York City is so expensive and so outrageously expensive at this point, considering the condition, frankly, that it's in, that I think it probably does, in fact, make it harder to pursue new things, to take risks. At the same time, I think it is very senior friendly. My mother, who is of an age, if I told you she would kill me, I'll just say she's 4 years shy of a very big birthday with 3 digits, and I think it's a good place also to combat loneliness in many ways.
Yeah. Oh.
Can you bring it to Candice? No,
Right now?
keep going. It's below.
What?
You know, the crowd is so quiet in Toledo. I have to tell you, I was just in Toledo. I loved it. They have a great museum.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. She's not buying my Toledo sales pitch. Toledo.
What tricks are you saving up your sleeve for the last third of your life? And thank you for your whole
whole
work.
Thanks.
I don't know.
What tricks am I saving? You know, I would like to try in my next chapter, and I've begun edging towards it. I would like to try stand-up comedy because, now, hear me out. I think it's the purest. It's one of the purest kinds of comedy. There's no safety net. It's just you and the audience. So I'm on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, which is a news comedy quiz show, which you've been a guest on. You came to Carnegie Hall to do it. And we've been doing sort of a not for air, but in front of live audience stand-up tour. So I've gone on a few dates, probably about 10 of them. And so I'm edging my way in. Now, a shrink once told me, don't do something for counterphobic reasons. Like, don't do something just because you're afraid of it. So I needed to
Why? Isn't that a good reason to do something?
Because you're afraid of it?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, and maybe I shouldn't have paid that man so much money. I think, you know, I think what you're saying is a good point. And I sort of go, okay, so wait, is this something I really want to do, or is it something that I'm just afraid of doing? So I resolved finally that it is something that I do want to do. So that's something I would like to keep pursuing and hopefully get good at.
Joy Behar.
Well, Joy Behar, though, didn't Joy Behar begin as a stand-up?
No, she had a series of jobs. She was a teacher, and then she was a receptionist and got fired. She was a single divorced parent.
You have quite a voice.
You have a fantastic voice, but and then what happened?
Well, and she just at 81 wrote her first play. You are not a view watcher.
Well, I wasn't a talk watcher, I'll tell you that. Sorry, which is the evil twin of the View.
She talks about that, and she encourages people. She's 81, and she encourages people in this way. So you are a little young to start stand up, according to her.
Okay, so in about 20 years, I'm gonna start stand-up. And that is why, for our sequel, we are starting off with Joy Behar. She's gonna be in the sequel. Thank you so much.
So hi Mo, I watch your Ford's Innovation Nation every week. Will you be recording any more of those?
Well, this is a television show that I host on Saturday mornings on CBS called Innovation Nation, which is taped at the marvelous Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation in Dearborn, Michigan. We just completed 10 seasons, and I'm sorry to report that is the last season. I'm sorry. I hate to just let... What do you want me to do?
Family oriented. You can watch it with kids.
Yeah.
It really is.
No, I agree. What is I feel like your name is Gladys. What's your name? Sorry. I wanted to... No, what is it?
My name is Jan.
Jan. Jan, that's what I meant. So, Jan, I think... Jan, it is a good. Is Jan getting thrown out? No. Okay, Jan. So no, but Jan, I agree, and I love television that you can watch as a family. Thank you so much for your support.
Okay, this next question is to me.
Can I read it then? Oh, and it's from Jan. So I feel like, Jan, can you read this question because you've got such a great voice? Okay, no, but turn around and project, Jan, project. Sing out, Louise. All right.
I knew she'd get in the light somehow.
Speak to the joys of grandparenting at an older age.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah. Oh, yeah. She wants to keep the question. Okay.
Okay. Well, I'm a grandparent, thank God. My daughter, who is 38, has a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old girl and a 4-year-old boy. The boy is like a little grenade and just never stops, and he's just fierce. But it's thrilling. And they live 3 blocks from me, and they come over to my apartment all the time, and we watch Tom and Jerry. And my daughter's gone. She's made it a point to make sure that I have a relationship with my grandkids, which is great because you have to work at it and you have to deploy people to take them there. And their school is about 2 blocks away from my apartment, so sometimes I walk them to school with the nanny or my daughter. And it's just great to live those years with these little things. And they're so alive and so I mean, there's just not a dead cell in their bodies.
And what do they call you?
Toto.
Toto.
Yep.
How did that, was it just organic?
My grandson came up with it. I don't know how. And now my daughter calls me Toto. Everybody calls me.
And can I also ask, with the 2 of them, is it a return to how you felt when your daughter was born, or is it different?
It's different. It's different because my daughter, I was very old. I was 39 when I had my daughter, and she was the love of my life. I mean, and still is the love of my life, and just turned my world inside out. But these guys do it at half the strength.
And it's nice to have a daughter and then grandsons, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I have a granddaughter and a
granddaughter, sorry.
grandson.
Okay, yeah. And that's so. And Tom and Jerry, good taste, right?
Yeah.
That you're watching classic cartoons.
That's right. Only the classics.
None of the cheap animation.
I know there's other things here. So, do you want to talk about?
Oh wait, can I ask you one other thing? Maybe. I know I don't want to bring the room down, but it's such an interesting story. It's not, but you know, there was that play last year or a couple of years ago about the great wit, raconteur, pianist, Oscar Levant. Sean Hayes won a Tony playing him.
Yeah.
And because you've had so many chapters, before you became a well-known actor, you were a photojournalist. And you were doing a story about him, is that right?
I did a piece on Oscar Levant. I watched Oscar Levant in those old movies where he was the kind of wise ass and he would play this piano that you think, my God, he was a great classical pianist and he was so funny and so fiercely smart. And so I met him at a party for Charlie Chaplin. And I said, and I introduced myself. I said, could I do a piece on you for Esquire magazine? And he said, sure. And I went over to his house, and he was sitting at his piano, which is where he spent the whole day, in his pajamas. And the piano was thatched with sheet music. It was like a huge thatch. And he would pull a sheet of music out and play it and play it. And I spent 2 hours with him. It was so thrilling. And then I went back to do like a sort of a follow-up to the piece, and he was dead. Because he was, part of the character that he assumed was, what do you call someone who thinks they're sick all the time?
Hypochondriac.
Thank you, a hypochondriac.
Yeah.
And he was this sort of hypochondriacal guy, and he was also very crazy. And his wife would put padlocks on the door because he used to go out at night to meet his drug dealer. And it was not easy being married to Oscar. But I went over there, and she went up to get him, and she screamed, and I thought, oh, this is not good. And he had died in bed. Sort of, he'd been practicing the piano, and had a towel over his head, and he was lying in bed. And when she took the towel off, he was sort of looking out the window.
Ooh, what an image. Did you love being a photojournalist?
Loved it. Yeah.
And did you have favorite stories?
Well, that was one. And I spent a weekend with Charlie Chaplin and Una Chaplin in Switzerland at their house, which turned out to be for a life piece that they were doing, and I sort of scooped the writer because I'd been with them the most time, and took photographs of him, and that was also fabulous.
And what was the occasion for that? Was that him returning to the
It
US?
was him returning to America.
For the first time in a
For
long
the first time since he'd been banished, so since the 50s, probably.
And was this when he was coming to get the honorary
Yeah.
Oscar?
Yeah.
And so what was that like?
Very emotional for him. And he was very excited, and just it brought up so much stuff.
And what was his manner like?
Like a child. He was childlike, and he was very old at the time, and I was sitting behind him in his box at the Oscars, and he was backstage at one point, and he was sipping a drink. It was like a Mai Tai drink, and he was sipping it with a straw and holding it like a little kid, and he was like, "Oh, this is so exciting!"
And you know, it's funny because those were the days when they didn't just do standing ovations for everything. And that, I think it's one of the longest standing ovations in Oscar history.
Yeah, they owed him.
But yeah. I can't remember who introduces him, but I've seen it on YouTube, and it's just extraordinary.
Yeah. Now we have to get back to you.
Okay.
Okay. Samuel Whitmore?
Oh, yeah. You know, so Samuel Whitmore, this is in a section on soldiers, older soldiers. Samuel Whitmore was 78 years old on the first day of the American Revolution, the first day of the battles of Lexington and Concord. And he insisted on fighting. He had fought for the crown before in the French and Indian Wars, and he had after I believe the Stamp Act had become an ardent sort of revolutionary. His family didn't want him fighting, but he insisted on it, and he picked off 3 redcoats before another redcoat blew the side of his face off, one of his cheeks, and then another one stabbed him in the head.
Oh my God.
And he kept on fighting. And he lived another 18 years.
Oh my God.
And let me just tell you that like Clint Eastwood would have been amazing in the biopic of Samuel Whitmore, but that is the spirit we all need, to have half of our face blown off, get stabbed in the head, and keep on going.
Wow. Wow.
And then John L. Burns is, the same year that Samuel Whitmore dies, a man named John L. Burns is born, who fights in several wars, including the War of 1812, later on in it, and tries to enlist with the Union Army in the Civil War, and is rejected, but as luck would have it, happens to be a constable, kind of a sinecure, in a town called Gettysburg. And so when the battle comes to town, he puts on his outdated regalia, grabs his very outdated musket, and he goes and he just volunteers with the militia there, and becomes the only known civilian to have fought at Gettysburg, and certainly the only one with a statue. And I talked to General Wesley Clark about this because I wanted to sort of understand the motives of older soldiers. And he was unfamiliar with these stories, but when I told him about them, he said he could understand from his own experience in Vietnam, waking up the next day after being injured and looking at his comrades, his fellow soldiers, and thinking, there is a real brotherhood here that will never go away, and that the intensity and the fervor only grows over time.
Ruth Slazinska?
Slenchinska.
Yeah.
Okay. There are a lot of letters in there. It's a Polish name. Ruth Slenczynska is somebody I met through my work at CBS Sunday Morning. She, at the time that I met her, was 97 years old. She had been the Shirley Temple of classical music, had been an extraordinary prodigy, even more extraordinary than a typical prodigy, right? At the age of 9, she had subbed for Rachmaninoff. I mean, crazy, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's sort of like, can you imagine, Rachmaninoff called her up and it was like, you know, I mean, can I talk to your daughter? I'm in a pickle right now. And he gave her a Fabergé egg that she still wears around her neck. She was a great classical pianist, an abusive father, a frustrated violinist who had been injured in World War I, who tormented her, who would literally chase her around the room with a stick when she wasn't practicing enough. Would not allow her to play outside. She could hear the strains of children down the street playing, her own sisters. It was at a concert in Berlin when she was 6 or 7, a child handed her a doll and the father snatched it away. I mean, really horror story stuff. And she understandably quit playing as a young woman, but had to return to it to basically survive. And when I met her, she was 97. She's now 99. And she had the longest lasting relationship in her life has been the piano. And it's what a love story, because now she's learned to love the piano on her terms. She loves playing. She said, you really only learn to become a pianist after the age of 60. She said, the notes are the same, but the story you tell is different.
Wow.
And it's a wonderful story. You know, I was very moved by it. She lives with a former student and that woman's husband. And they told me, you know, she didn't really have a childhood. So she carved her first jack-o'-lantern with this couple's grandkids when Ruth was in her 90s. And she's experiencing things she never experienced as a child living with them. But the peace and the calm that I got from her was quite something. But that is, again, a return to childhood, but in a much sweeter way. Yeah.
I don't know when we're supposed to wrap this up. Is it?
I feel like we need a really great line to go out on.
I don't have it.
So let me just say that Mr. Pickles the tortoise is expected to live until he's 150.
Wow.
So at this rate, he could become the Nick Cannon of tortoises. Thank you very much, Candice. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jan. Thank you.
This is a very entertaining, educational, well-written book.
And forgive me for multiple endings here. I did want to very briefly acknowledge my wonderful friend and co-author, Jonathan Greenberg. I'm not sure where he's sitting. Stand up. You have to stand. You have to be more Hollywood. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.